Well, wasn't that exciting to hear that Jotham is related to Joseph? He's his nephew. That's exciting. Well, here we are, day 14. Let's see where it goes. It's called Ways and Means. For every star he saw through the window, Jotham made one imaginary mark on his leg with his finger. It was the only way he knew to count, and he'd seen his father do it many times in the dirt as they counted their sheep. He'd been lying there for hours trying to sleep, but nothing could keep his mind from thinking about the fact that the Messiah was going to be his cousin. Between that and the wind that still blew outside, Jotham hadn't slept a moment. Sometime after midnight, Jotham saw the same bright star he'd been watching since he was parted from his family. Just like before, he wondered if maybe his mother was looking at the same star. She could be, he knew, because no matter where you traveled, you could always see the same star. The thought gave him comfort, and a short time later, he was finally asleep. After breakfast the next morning, Jotham took care of John so Elizabeth could talk with Zechariah. Jotham liked playing with the baby. It made him feel more grown up. Nothing much went on all morning, and Jotham was becoming bored. Once, a rider came through and asked if he could water his horse, and Jotham was sure Zechariah wouldn't mind, so had let him. Other than that, he just played with John and wondered where the wind had gone to when it ceased blowing earlier that morning. Is it all stored in a cave somewhere? Jotham wondered. Just before lunch, Zechariah called Jotham in. We've been talking, he said, waving his hand to 3 other men and Elizabeth, and we believe we know where your family is. Jotham jumped up, almost dropping John on his head. Elizabeth grabbed the baby as Jotham said, Where? Where? Easy, Jotham. We are not at all certain of this. First, let me ask you some questions. Did your father say anything in the last few weeks about returning to the place of his birth? Jotham shrugged. I don't know. He and my mother talk about many things. Mostly, I don't listen. Zechariah frowned. Well, did he say anything at all about traveling? I don't know, Jotham said again, and this frustrated the men. But you said he was sending your brothers to the city. Did he say why? As Jotham's face lit up, because he finally knew an answer. Yes, he told my brothers to sell 1/10 of their sheep to a man there. Zechariah sat back and slapped the table. That's it then, he said. It must be. Jotham looked from face to face, trying to figure out what they were talking about. What's it? He pleaded. What must be? Zechariah looked at Jotham and then slowly said, Your father is headed to the place of his birth for the census. Jotham stared, not understanding. What's a census? He asked. A census is when the government counts all the people under its rule. One of the other men said, Each family must return to the place of his father's birth to be counted and pay tax. Which is why, Zechariah added, your father is going there. If he told your brothers to sell 1/10 of their flock, it must have been so he could pay his taxes. Suddenly it all became clear to Jotham, and he jumped up, finally excited. That means my father is on his way to Jerusalem. Exactly. Unless he's already been there and left again. He's had more than a week and could easily travel that far in that time. Then I've got to go right now, Jotham yelled, not caring for a moment who had authority over him. I had a feeling you might say that, Zechariah said. So we've been talking, and it's been decided that Caleb here shall take you to Jerusalem. He pointed to a man that Jotham thought didn't look much older than his oldest brother. It will be a long, hard journey, but not so far as you've already come. I would take you myself, but I am old, and Caleb will serve you better. I am honored for the kindness you show to a simple sheepherder, Jotham said with a bow, repeating another of his father's sayings. He didn't notice that the adults all looked at each other and smiled. We leave tomorrow at first light, Caleb announced, and Jotham's heart fell. Can't we leave today, he asked. My father might even now be packing his tents. Jotham, it is not polite to receive a gift and then ask for more, Elizabeth scolded. Be thankful that Caleb has agreed to this journey at all. Forgive me, Jotham said, frustrated. It's just that I've been away from my family for a very long time." "I understand," Caleb said, "and we would leave immediately if it were possible. But I'm afraid that it is not. We have much packing to do, and I must prepare the animals for the journey." Jotham nodded glumly, but didn't say anything. He knew Caleb was doing his best, but he still wished there was some way to leave right now. Caleb went to the stable to feed and water the donkeys, and Jotham went to help him. Caleb was nice, he decided, and he looked forward to their trip together. Having done all he could do to help Caleb, Jotham decided to make the afternoon go quicker by stacking the firewood left over from the day before. As he did, he dreamed of arising in Jerusalem and finding his family there. He planned out just what he would say to his father and just how hard he would hug his mother. She would cry, he decided, since she thought he was dead and didn't expect to see him. Jotham was just finishing up the wood when thunder began rolling in from the west. Another storm, he thought, and he hoped it wouldn't delay their trip. He could see that Caleb was packing bedding and food into the saddlebags that would go on the donkeys. Then he watched as Caleb crossed to the house and thought again what a good friend he was going to make. The thunder was getting closer and louder, and Jotham decided he'd better hurry and get the wood stacked. He turned back to his work and was thinking so hard that he didn't even notice that the thunder didn't sound much like thunder anymore. And when finally it grew so loud that he turned to face the storm, he faced instead the sight of a dozen horses at a full run, headed straight for him. And leading them all, on a horse that looked like the devil himself, was Decca of Megiddo. Decca didn't take his eyes off Jotham, but just whipped his horse to go faster. Jotham couldn't make his muscles move and stood there in shock. Then Decca rode right past him, never taking his eyes off Jotham. Suddenly Jotham felt himself lifted from the ground by two pairs of powerful hands. He was being swept away between two gigantic horses, held there in midair by two of Decca's men. Zachariah and the other man ran from the house just in time to see the horsemen, and Jotham disappearing over the hill. The man on Jotham's left threw him roughly across his lap so that Jotham was lying on his stomach. Every bounce of the horse slammed his stomach into the rider's knees, and the ground whisked by at a dizzying speed. Within minutes, Jotham became sick and retched up all the parched corn that Elizabeth had so lovingly made him. But worse than any of this, worse even than the fact that he had been taken by Decca of Megiddo, was the fact that they were riding east, away from Jerusalem. "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Isaiah 55:8. Joseph must have wondered why, of all the times for there to be a census, they had to pick the time when his baby was due to be born. If God was so involved in this birth, Joseph might have wondered, why did he allow the government to call for a census just then? But of course, if Joseph and Mary hadn't been forced to travel to Bethlehem, then the prophecy about the birthplace of the Messiah would never have been fulfilled. Nor would the prophecy about there being no room in the inn, or about Jesus lying in the manger. What may have seemed like a mistake to Joseph was actually just God's way of carrying out his plan. Jotham feels like his whole world has just fallen apart. Not only is his life in danger, but he's traveling farther and farther away from his family. Surely this can't be God's way of working things out, can it? As we watch the seemingly accidental events of our Christmas story unfold, maybe we should look back on our own lives and see if we can't recognize some ways which were not ours, but God's. This is getting really exciting, isn't it? Hope you're all enjoying the story. Good night.